Welcome to the Global Wellness HQ family of podcasts. We are your international headquarters for resources and ideas and insight in relation to the 9 elements of holistic wellness. Join us as we interview local and international wellness experts and learn how you can implement and improve one element or dimension of wellness at a time. Our experts will share their practical tips on wellness in one of these core areas: emotional, intellectual, occupational, physical, environmental, financial, spiritual, social, or habitual. We created our family of podcasts as a resource for anyone who is looking to integrate the 9 elements of holistic wellness into their daily lives. Welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today, I'm really excited. I have my new friend, Laurence Whittam, with me. Laurence, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell my audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Jeff. No, appreciate it. Very nice to see you, and I'm glad we got to meet the other day as well on the, I think it was the AIR meeting that we met.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm Laurence Whittam. I work with CPA firms and accounting firms. I consult with them. I help them with their offshoring and outsourcing journeys, whether it's domestically or internationally. I'm more of an implementer, so I really actually am that missing link between the firm and the outsourcing firm in a lot of cases. I don't provide talent to them, but I'll happily introduce them to a lot of vendors that, again, are trusted, I've done due diligence on, but really I come in and help when they're having headaches. I try and make them have a better life and experience working with outsourcing. I've seen it done extremely well over the years. I've seen it done extremely poorly over the years. And it's a balance. It's a balance between both the firm doing their part as well as the outsourcing vendor doing their part. So I essentially become that third party that understands and educates on the best practices, but also can be a voice of reason and say, okay, no, you're the person or you're the party that has to pick up the slack right now, right? It's a relationship at the end of the day. So, and again, I like to think I do a very good job from that perspective. I've got a lot of accountants that will vouch for me and say I've helped them along the journey at different stages. And honestly, from sole proprietors up to top 20 CPA firms, I've been helping over the years. So
I love it. And for the record, we'll talk about accountants specifically because that's where Laurence spends his time. But I want my listeners, the successful entrepreneurs, to listen to this and say, where can I take this? Because I think a lot of what you and I are going to talk about, yes, it applies to accountants, but the reality is I think a lot of businesses are also facing issues with staffing and with lack of systems and processes. So I think we're going to have a little bit of fun, and we're probably going to cover a broad range of topics. So let's jump into the outsourcing piece. You mentioned you've seen it done well and you've seen it done badly, and I know the opposite ends of the extremes there. Let's talk about what does outsourcing look like when it's done correctly, and how does that contribute to someone's wellness versus when it's done badly and it leads to headaches and frustration.
So outsourcing specifically, and again, we can treat it from the perspective of both onshore and offshore, right? You can work with a provider or a vendor onshore just the same as you can offshore, right? There's certain economical differences, obviously, and there's certain challenges based on even where you go in the world. So in the US, typical places are like offshore India. You would go to the Philippines. You're seeing South America as well, and also South Africa as sort of key locations, mainly in the finance space, but also outside and just with traditional business, right? And when we talk about doing it successfully, you've got to sort of think about the 3 Ps, I call it, like people, process, and platform. Okay. People will replace platform with technology sometimes, right? Which is perfectly fine. But the firms that have done it well over the years and have created a good system are the ones that have treated very similar to like their hiring, right? In a sense of you put effort behind the hiring stage, you make sure you train, you have a process behind trying to find the right people that are a good fit for your organization. If you're working on that full-time model where you're working with talent as just like you're hiring. But then the process side, if you don't want to deal with that aspect, you've got to have a sound process, right? And it's not just about a standard operating procedure that's in place one day that you've made at the beginning of your business cycle and it's never been touched again. That's not a good standard operating procedure, right? Things change, technology changes, right? The process becomes more efficient in a lot of cases. And when somebody else, it may work for you, but you may not have given it to somebody else to then look at it and say, like, okay, does this really make sense as well? Right. So we need to make a sound process, which is extremely easy to replicate and do. And there also needs to be controls in place to make sure that who's checking that those processes have been followed to a T, who's training for those processes. Right. So it's everything, it's fully encompassing the same thing we do in our business, but now probably taking it a step further to make sure that it's, and I don't like to say the word dumbed down, but we really break everything down so that somebody less experienced can do it, right? Because then you're able to scale, and you may need different skill sets of people to do the whole process. You may say, hey, you know what? I do this whole process. However, I'm going to turn my process into 3 separate processes now. And I'm going to have different people doing each one. A, because it makes it more efficient, right? Think of an assembly line, right? And B, because, okay, now I can definitely get the talent to do all stages of those. I may not be able to find as many senior people, right, that I can dig from the talent pool to actually do the whole process for me. So now I need to separate it a little bit. So that's a good scenario. That's somebody that's really thought about it. And it's very similar to like the assembly line type model when we're looking at a process perspective, or looking at it from a people hiring perspective. We've got to dig down into training. We've got to dig down into the hiring stage. How are we looking at things from that perspective? And what that will come from that is that you will be a lot more comfortable with the result. You'll be very clear with the reporting structures that are coming out so you can see it's actually working for you, right? When it doesn't work is when, just like you're throwing stuff at a wall, right, and you're hoping it sticks, right? If you give bad stuff initially in and put it in there and say, hey, can you just do this project for me? It's not going to come out as expected. Okay. There needs to be like a very clear process, right? The firms that do it or the businesses that do it badly will just say, hey, here's what I want from it. Can you go and do this? No, because by the time that they actually put their own process in place and do their own how side of it, it may not actually finish the way that you want it, right? So that expectation isn't set clearly enough. So they actually, a lot of these cultures would prefer you telling them exactly what to do rather than saying, this is the result I want. Can you just figure out how to get here for me? Right? That's a very difficult thing for a lot of these outsourcing firms to do because they're not in your business. They're not you. Right. So that's really the difference between the two. And I would just say as well with when it's unsuccessful is, again, thinking about it as this is just labor, this is just a process, right? You need to put some mind behind it in terms of like, these are people you're working with, right? If you're not motivating them to do the work, right? If you're not treating them like part of your team from that perspective, if you're not thinking about it in those fashions as well, in a lot of cases, they're not going to want to work for you, right? At the end of the day as well, they're not going to want to perform to the best of their ability. You got to put motivating factors around them as well. So, and it depends on the model you're working with in a lot of cases, but either way, you've got to be in there. You've got to actually put some effort into doing this, especially at the beginning, and you've got to invest that time and effort. Otherwise, it's just never going to be a success.
And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. If you don't mind, I'm going to go back and unpack a few of those, because one of the things I see time and time and time again is accountants try to delegate everything. And usually this applies to professionals of any industry,
Correct.
more or less, but you get to the point where you're overworked, you're almost burnt out, and you just use outsourcing as okay, here, take it all. And for the record, this applies equally to hiring an employee to sit at a desk. When I talk about outsourcing, I'm talking about getting it off my desk and somewhere else.
Yeah.
But when it comes to offshore, it just fascinates me because without any context, without any of the background, you just dump something and you hope that they can sift through the garbage and come up with the polished process in the end. And to me, that is the worst possible use of any human resource, whether it's somebody local or offshore. And I want to pull out what you said about taking a process and breaking it up, because again, I'll meet an accountant who'll say, a process is file a tax return. Well, the
Yep.
reality is that's not a process. That's at least a dozen. There's data gathering, there's processing, there's quality control. I think the biggest mistake, and I want to hear your opinion, a lot of accountants over chunk it and they just say, what they're delegating is a project, but they think it's a task. Is that a fair comment?
Correct. A lot of them will, again, give a whole tax return away, right? Or give a client to a team member and say, hey, this is your client, right? This is technically within your skill set because this is from A to Z on the accounting side of things, right? You just need to be able to produce up to the financial statements, do the payroll. You've told me you can do all that, right? So here's the client, right? Which again isn't the way they can be the manager of that client, right? But also, like, in a lot of cases, you could separate even the customer service aspect of that. You can separate, like you said, the data gathering, the resource gathering, right? And the source documents. You can generally separate the accounting, the bookkeeping from the financial reporting and the payroll. All those can be separate responsibilities for different people, and doing those specific areas, they become more efficient with that as well, right? So you can actually create a better process and churn by doing that than necessarily like giving a whole client away.
And I think what I would say is a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, or accountants, we know this stuff inside out, but what you don't realize is, you spent a decade or longer going to training and university and becoming an expert at the thing that you're an expert at. It's almost impossible to delegate the whole thing at once, because it's not likely that somebody offshore is going to have the exact training. And by the way, this is, I think, why a lot of accountants struggle, is they don't know how to chunk or break down what they do so that they can explain it to an employee. And
Yeah,
then they end up overburdened. Is that fair?
it's exactly right. Right. It's that, and understanding, just like you're saying, like who they are. They've had a different life experience. They are in India, in the Philippines, in a different. You can't have the same expectations for somebody with 2 years of experience here in the US, even to 2 years of US, even if they're doing US accounting, 2 years of experience in India or the Philippines, for the pure fact and reason that, again, their everyday transactions that are going on are completely different, right? They come in and they do US accounting, but then they leave the office, they're still in India, they're doing their day-to-day things. There's a different culture there, they have their own religion, they've got different holidays and all these things that one of the big things that shocks me a little bit, right, is that when we're in school, if I did international business for not even like a huge subject, but like a couple of classes like throughout my college degree. And one of the big things they talk about is obviously the side of, if you have a client in Japan, or if you have a client in India, or a client somewhere in the world, because it's your client, you go and take some effort before you go and meet them to understand the culture a little bit and to put a bit of effort so that you don't do anything that insults them, right?
Yeah.
But this is like, we're now essentially hiring employees around the globe, but yet the leaders and the managers don't necessarily know anything about the culture, right? And they're not taking, previously, a lot of firms don't take the effort to even try, right? Which, okay, it's not really on the ethical side of doing things correctly, right? We should
Yeah.
take a step back and learn, and just life gets easier when we actually like take a step back and take a second, learn about what somebody else is going through. And this goes for even domestically in the US with virtual hires, right, around the world, like around the US. Again, people have different scenarios than being in the office when we were all together, right? We have life that goes on. So we've got to understand that cultural side.
Well, and just to add to that, I've trained a bunch of people offshore, and I started sort of when I first started, it was like, okay, here's the differences in accounting. And then I realized, whoops, as you said, we got to step back to the culture. But little things like, by the time somebody reaches the age of 18 in North America, without thinking, you can drive down the street and you can say, that logo, that's Walmart, that's
Yep.
Costco. I realized we just had to, first of all, teach people what our clients, where they're spending their money, because you'd look at it and say, well, everybody knows that Tim Hortons is Canadian coffee and donuts. Well, no, they don't. But then it's like, well, is it a deduction or not? Well, how do they know? So that was one of the things that I realized was just little things like the culture of, here's what's deductible, here's where people spend their money, um, here's the big companies you're going to see, the names you're going to see over and over again. That context is not given. It's something that we earn, and I'm guessing you came with a background in the UK.
Yeah,
When you came to New York, I bet there was a bit of a learning curve, right?
correct. My geography is still terrible. So
And
it was never great in the UK either, but I mean it's terrible now. I'm still saying north and south, and apparently, and we're all east and west over here. So
oh, well, there you go. See, and those are the little tiny cultural things that nobody's just going to pick up. But, part of it is just questioning, what do I know that somebody new to this wouldn't know? And, back to, breaking things down, you talk about processes a lot. I firmly believe, and we're going to talk about processes a little bit more. The reason they don't work is a lot of times the expert, the one who knows it inside and out, they create the process once, 10 years ago, and then they hand people a binder and say, here's your process binder. I'm not exaggerating, but I worked at a large international accounting firm. First day on the job, I got a process binder. And what I realized was everybody used it to prop their monitors up so they were the right height.
yeah, that's funny.
So you got to have processes that are accessible. And, so let's talk a little bit more about chunking and breaking them down, because, I think you said it so simply. It is about simplifying, and you use the phrase dumbing it down. But the reality is you're figuring out what somebody new to this role, because I think most people write processes from, if you're going to be an expert at this, what do you need to know?
Yeah.
And it's like, nobody ever woke up one day and said, hey, I'm an expert, without several steps to get there. What are your thoughts on breaking down tasks a little further?
Yeah, I mean, well, exactly that. I mean, like you said, you got given a giant binder, right, of process that, again, those processes were probably broken down, but you got given the expert guide immediately, right, at the end of the day. Like, that's not necessarily a motivating way to receive it, because, again, you can't take in that information in that level of time, right? I mean, realistically, like, you should have had a beginner's guide, right? And you should have had a certain section. We should have been working on it. And again, different people need different lengths of time to learn. There's different methods that they need to learn it in as well. Some people like the visual learning. Some people need that guide to sit with and just read over a few times, right, in order to understand it. But if you give them a 20-page guide for a process, it's going to be very difficult for them to take that in, compared to breaking it down. Okay, here's a segment of this process. Okay, these are the clients that I want you to do it on. Right. And now I'm going to take on the rest of the process for these clients initially. Right. And then what we're going to do every week, we'll take another step at a different process. Right. And based on the size of that process, it may take a different length of time. But if you give them the whole client, it's not going to work. Right. They're going to get way more things wrong in it than if you just gave them the small segment a little bit at a time and you were a bit more patient with them. right? And what that'll cause from the wellness side of it, right? You're having to correct them, you're having to come back to them, you're getting frustrated yourself. So you're actually going to overwhelm yourself more than typically they're gonna see it as, okay, I'm learning. It was a problem that came up, right? I got something wrong, but I'm learning, right?
Yeah.
You can't also fault them for that, right? At the end of the day, because they're not going to want to stay with you. They'll go somewhere else. So it's the point of, but it's going to frustrate you, right? Quite a lot if you expect them to complete it and you're not taking into account the amount of errors that they're going to start making because you're giving them too big of a process, right? So it's those elements that again, and that's how you've got to segment. That's why as you get up in bigger and bigger companies, right, you see like even they delegate very well. They have people that are just doing accounts receivable, accounts payable. You see it more so in companies than you do in accounting firms, just to be clear, right? You'll see in a company, they'll break the payroll. This is the person doing payroll. This is the person doing the accounting. This is the person doing the bookkeeping. This is the person doing just the tax stuff, right? And that's in their finance team. That's what they're doing, right? Customer service. This is a person just making cold calls, right? This is a person doing email campaigns, right? So that a lot of these bigger businesses and running as a business, they do break it down pretty well. I would say in the accounting firm side of things, they struggle a little bit.
Well, the irony, Lawrence, is that accountants naturally do this well, and then somehow they forget about it. And the reason I say that, um, again, when I was an articling student, you were given a cash segment of a file. You were told to do that section of the file. And once you got that, then they gave you the next section was, usually accounts receivable and then usually accounts payable. No articling student ever sat down and did a file start to finish their first day.
Yeah.
Yet when it comes to outsourcing, we expect that, which is a very weird concept to me that, we don't do it with our in-house hires. Why would we do that with external?
Yeah, and our outsourcing, offshoring, contractors, right? Same thing. They all sort of fall in because we have an expectation they're just going to come in and be able to do, right? But every firm and every business has different processes. They have different expectations. They have different ideas as to what really they want at the end of the day for the completed package. I can give the same tax return source documents to 10 different accountants, and I guarantee I get 10 different results back, right? And somebody's going to have a different comment, right? It's again, it's and anybody that goes to an accountant goes to the next accountant with their set of books. I guarantee that accountant will have something to pick apart from the first accountant, and you can keep going in the circle, and everybody's going to say, "Nah, they didn't do it quite right. They've got to do it like this." It's typically what I hear and see.
Well, just to double down on that, I worked at an accounting firm that had 4 partners, and we had 4 different acceptable file types. And I was in there at one point when we had a big shuffling. The senior accountants gave their clients to a junior partner. We started files expecting to complete them under the old partner regime. And then when the dust settled and the file was done, it came back to the employees and said, no, you got to redo it because the new partner has different standards. And I was like, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. That, we had 4 ways of doing things. And sometimes there was a 5th way because, 2 partners worked on the file together. It
Yeah.
was like, could we just pick, one way? I'm a big fan of having one best practice, but that's the reality. Like our firm, we had this ridiculous turnover because people were always feeling frustrated and confused.
Yeah,
And
and again, just as you're saying, right? I mean, different, even right now, like different firms in their tax department, they'll have a different partner and they essentially run their own business within there in a sense, right? So that firm partner may be the popular with team members. Another one may not be as popular and may not have as many team members or may not be the preferred person to work with or whatever case, right? But I've seen over the years that one provider, like it could be one tax partner is having a great time with an outsourcing provider, and then the other tax partner hates the firm, right? Hates the vendor for whatever case, has a terrible experience. Now, why is that? Why is it so drastically different, right? I mean, there has to be something, and it's generally because of the relationship of the person. One's more patient than another one. One went and did more training than the other one, right? In a lot of cases. I always say, like, it's about the relationship first. Like, there's a lot of very good outsourcing firms out there. They're all pulling from similar pools of talent, right? At the end of the day, some of them have better practices than others, right? But it's still a very relationship driven industry. So it's, again, you have to know who you're working with, and the better relationship you have with the partners, the team members that you're working with, sort of the more not get away with, but the more they're going to be more patient with you in a lot of cases. The more time they're going to spend with you to train and not get as frustrated with things too. That's what I've seen. So,
Well, and you mentioned your three Ps, and people, I'm sorry, but you can't shortcut relationships. You've got to take that
yeah,
time, whether this is employees, whether it's subcontractors, whether it's, service providers or clients for that matter. You've got to take that time to build those relationships and make sure, because the worst thing you can do is start a path and then having to keep going down that same path because you annoyed, and I've seen this where accountants get really confused. An offshore provider will say, we love working with this employee, this partner, we can't stand working for that person, so we're only going to do files for one of your partners, not all of them. um, that puts the one partner who gets it in a tough place. But the reality is these people, just because they're offshore doesn't mean that they're here for us to kick around. But they also want quality of life. Is that a fair comment?
correct. I mean, I was saying I was just on a podcast literally before this one, and one of the big things is he mentioned it's not about a work-life balance anymore. It's about a life-work balance. You've got to put your life first, right? But as a leader in a business, you've also got to make sure your employees and your team members are putting their life first before the work. And you've got to expect that that's going to be the case, whether they're offshore, whether they're onshore, wherever. And you've got to give them an environment to be able to do so in a lot of the cases as well, because now people are becoming more and more valuable from the perspective, especially in the finance world, because there is more of a scarcity of finance professionals in the world. It's not the most, like, again, it's been seen as not the best profession to get into because the starting salaries and all these different areas. I see so many firms like really working on that, and again, like bringing up the starting salaries, like making their cultures in their firms like great, like a lot better than they have been, and like taking the leaf out of other industries' books from that perspective, rather than just following the typical trend. But it takes time to change as a whole profession, right? At the end of the day, so it's never that mindset isn't going to change immediately. But I see a lot of people changing, but it's just, again, it does take some time. And you've got to think about the people.
Well, and I think that's actually something really fascinating. And I want to talk about the blending of teams, because I feel like that's another area that gets done wrong is, offshore resources are brought in kind of to bully and threaten local staff to make them, for lack of a better word, negotiating down on salary, or, if you don't want this work, we'll send it offshore. How do you see offshore resources actually improving the life balance of onshore people? Because I hear a lot of noise about it's either local or offshore. I personally think offshore is just a tool to help onshore people be more productive. I'd love your thoughts on that, Laurence.
Yeah, so I mean, completely agree, right? At the end of the day, I mean, it's more economical to hire offshore typically from that perspective, but it is, I would say 99% of the time, not the firm leaders reasoning behind doing it is to lay somebody off internally, right? And the big important factor, and this is what I try and work on a lot with the firm leaders and business owners, and is making sure they actually expand that vision across the firm to their team members from the bottom up, right? Because the partners need to be on board with it. Your leadership needs to be on board with it. The team members who are working, the managers, the directors, the seniors, the associates need to understand why you're doing it, right? At the end of the day. And everybody needs to be on the same page, right? And the answer in the majority of cases, especially in the accounting profession, is that we have a shortage of talent. We have plenty of work coming in, right? We need, in order for us to grow and keep giving you career growth as a team member on our team, we want to spend more time with you to train you on more high level work as well. We can't do that if you're focused on doing the grunt work, right? And not just the grunt work, but also then providing the outsourced talent and the offshore talent a career path up as well, right? In a lot of cases. So it's now saying, yes, it was to pass it down initially, but now it's actually a lot of these firms are investing in growing a career path and creating one for the offshore team members as well in a lot of cases, right? So, but it's nobody's getting let go from that perspective. Like, again, even with the economy as what it is, I mean, especially in this industry, it's nothing to do with that side of things. It's literally just they have plenty of work. They're actually culling clients, right? I mean, I can guarantee that any business owner on this call, within the past 2 or 3 years, I guarantee the pricing for you working with an accountant has gone up quite drastically over the past 2 or 3 years, right? And it's because they've realized their value and worth in a lot of the types of work that they're doing. They're trying to provide more advisory services. It's not just about a compliance type tax return or account set of books, right? We're looking forward in the future. And again, a lot of the profession is trying to do that more now, but also that you've got a shortage of talent, right? So now they're having to, because they're having to pay more to people coming into the profession. They're having to pay for more for the experienced talent as well. I mean, in India alone, I was for the past, probably between the last 2 or 3 years, salaries have probably gone up on average about 40 to 50%. And in a lot of cases, they were doubling in the accounting industry. It was, again, it was crazy. It was literally people were going all over. They were getting offers from KPMG, Deloitte, EY, which was 100% more than they were currently getting. And they weren't getting bad salaries, right? So the industry knew what was happening, right? And the profession knew what was happening. And now there is a big push for it at the end of the day. So, but it's never about, but you have to communicate and be transparent as a business. So if you don't communicate with your team, they're always going to have their own mindset and thoughts as to what's going on.
I love that. And I think communication is such an important thing because, we need to communicate as a profession. We need to communicate with our employees. We need to communicate with our vendors, but we also need to communicate with our clients. And, I think back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, a lot of accountants negotiated against themselves. There was this overwhelming, the only way I know how to get business is to be the cheapest one. So I'll keep dropping my price until the client says yes. That is a painful way to run a business. I'm
Race
sorry
to the bottom.
say. There is no prize for second cheapest accountant. You're the cheapest and you win the industry. But my question for you is, do you want to win that industry? But I would say this for the clients out there as well. When you're looking at buying the services of an accountant, do you truly want the cheapest out there? Because what are you not getting? And I think, the reality is, there's files that aren't being done on time. There's tax deadlines being missed. Those are annoying, but the reality is, and Laurence, I want to hear your thoughts. If you're not getting that proactive advice that you need to run your business, that's literally the difference between success and failure today. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, exactly that. I mean, it's and problems are becoming more complex, right? At the end of the day, like it's not getting any easier. There's different law changes, more and more common, based on flips in the political side of things and all this, right? I mean, it doesn't make it any easier for the business owner, right? But as your business grows as well, like just decisions get more complex. So you want a professional, you want an advisor to turn to. The lawyer and your lawyer, your banker, and your accountant are generally the people that you turn to first, right? And I would say previously the accountant was more of a reactive type of question, whereas now they're getting a lot more heavily involved in, okay, well, I'm happy to spend the time and sit in the meeting on your board with your CFO and let me hear what's going on from a planning perspective, because now I can look at the numbers and forecast and do a better job from you from that perspective, right? When you're just acting in a reactive side, a lot of business owners would get frustrated because, again, I mean, they can't now project. They don't know what they can spend, what they can't spend, right? And it becomes a lot more difficult to actually run the business if you're not looking forward. So it's changed a lot. It has changed a lot.
I love that. And my analogy I always use, it's kind of like trying to drive a car looking in the rear view mirror. It's not ideal. You can do it, doesn't mean you should. So now, Laurence, I could talk to you about outsourcing all day long. I think the big lessons I've taken away from this is that reminder how important processes and people can be. Is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't yet?
So I think one of the comments that I could make prior to finishing up is just around that platform and technology side, right? Just to wrap it up and more to be, again, technology is changing every day, right? We've seen huge advancements with different things and implementing those pieces of technology like ChatGPT, just as the easiest, biggest example, right? What we can use it for, what we can't use it for. And again, that just means that you have to implement these types of things to make sure that you're becoming more and more efficient. You can now generally save money, right? And this is another area that I know in the finance world, it's developing so quickly since COVID, right? So, and outside of that, I know that just with ChatGPT and the other add-ons, you've got about 1,000 plugins you can use with it, right? Where content is now like that, right? You can create your content. That doesn't mean marketers are gone, right? I mean, you still need the people to harness what it's actually using the technology side, but you can get a lot more done if you create a process around it and do it properly. You can also get taken advantage of as a business owner if you don't understand it yourself, know what is capable of some of these things as well. So that's just where I would say highly suggest everybody as well from that perspective. Doesn't just think about the people and the process, but really look at, hey, listen, this part of the process right now, is this fit for a person or is this fit for technology, right? Because that's where there are replacements, especially with that compliance and lower end sides of the process, where you can now eliminate that portion or at least increase the efficiency tenfold.
And I think that's, I was on a call with a bunch of people who work with accountants, and very few of them even had the conversation about AI. And the reality is, this is not an optional, I'll look at it someday. Laurence, you're a young guy, so I don't expect you would know this, but when the digital tax return first came out, in Canada, especially, I think in the US too, something like 30% of accountants left the industry because they didn't want to have to learn this fly-by-night new technology that was going to disappear and take jobs. We've had 30 years since that conversation was relevant. AI, we've had 30 months at most. Yeah. I mean, the timelines have colossally collapsed.
Correct. No, I mean, 100%. I mean, that case specifically, and again, coming from the UK, I'll just give an example of even the banking system, right? Everything's so different worldwide. Like, again, we got rid of checks 2012 maybe completely, like no checks whatsoever. I was last year. I mean, I still receive checks today, right? No, it's still paper, right? And again, it's just we're all at different stages essentially, but like there is automation coming in, right? It's not going to eliminate stuff completely, but you've got to be on top of it because otherwise you will get left behind quickly in a lot of cases if you're not even looking into it for your specific business line, right? Is the most important thing, like just to be at least aware of it from what it's capable of within your business line.
Well, and I'm going to say this for the accountants that are watching this. Honestly, I believe you have a moral obligation to lead your clients. And if you're not exploring what's going on out there, you're going to lose that ability to relate to your clients. I'll let you have final thoughts on that comment.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's lots of I completely agree. I mean, it's a big push in the industry, right? To say like, guys, you're an advisor. You've got to be aware of these things going on because you have to at least bring these topics up to the owners that you're working with so that they're aware of it, right? At the end of the day, like we in the profession, like the AICPA, they've got conferences going on that is specifically talking about like the digital advancements, right? The not just about the challenges in the accounting profession, but physically like what is out there right now. What should we be looking at from the tax planning perspective? What should we look at from financial reporting, development of financial planning and insurance and wealth management and all these things that they need to have an idea. They don't need to know all the answers, but they need to know this is an area you've got to think about. This is who you should go and talk to, right? And they're essentially building that core network around them. And that's a big push in the industry, right? It's a big push to make sure that they do have and are looking at these different areas to be that true advisor. So I would completely agree with you.
I love that. And I think I want to leave on a final optimistic note. AI is not going to eliminate the need for accountants, but it is going to free accountants up to have better conversations, you know, do more of the fun things. And I think that's where I see AI is this new space where, accountants are very logical and rational. It is amazing what you can do to analyze data and honestly, I think we're looking at more complexities in regulation, more complexities in, financial fraud, financial crimes. We need to
Yeah.
be smarter than the people that are committing these issues and causing these problems.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's a difficult one though, because again, they're typically very smart people doing it.
Exactly. Well, Laurence, what if somebody likes what they're hearing, you have your own company, how can people get in touch with you? How can they reach out and say, I saw you on Jeff's podcast. I'd love to work with you. What's the next step in that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, definitely check me out on LinkedIn. So Laurence Whittam, and again, I believe the link will be posted for you. Again, very active on LinkedIn, so you can reach out, DM me, or look up Impact Global Solutions. I do have the website is biz problemsolver.com. And again, I work with the reason for that is I work with accountants, like I work with business owners. I go through it varies from an industry perspective. I focus a lot on the finance talent side of the world. I know exactly where the finance talent pools are, which is the reason why. But I can help with different areas. And again, I want to be a resource. I want to help people explore these different areas, and I want to help people have more successful endeavors doing it. So there's a lot of great areas where you can work with professionals worldwide. And again, I'm sure there's areas if you're struggling with certain types of talent, I can come and help find those talent pools for you.
I love it. Well, Laurence, I want to thank you on behalf of my audience. I want to thank you for hanging out and having a conversation with me today.
Yeah, no, it was awesome, Jeff. No, appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to either click the link below or scan the QR code to register and listen to other episodes of our podcast. Or if you think your business or you would be a great guest to be on our show, we're always looking for experts in one of the 9 elements of holistic wellness. We'd love to have you. You can either click the link below or you can scan the QR code and complete our speaker intake form. Thank you, and to your wellness.